Okay, so here we are at the CEA Controlled Environment Agriculture and Indoor Farming event with our second roundtable of the day, as it should be. Got a really interesting conversation coming up. I'm going to hand you over to my UKUAT colleague, Jake Nickles, who's going to take you from here. So, Jake, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark, and yeah, welcome to this session. Today, we're going to be talking about a very different context to what's been approached so far in the sessions that you will have seen before. So, very briefly, I'm Jacob Nickles. I'm a research fellow at the University of Sheffield, and I have research interests in the optimization and integration of sustainable agricultural technologies. And that basically means I'm researching how to make CEA more sustainable in a range of contexts. And this could be from community farming projects up to closed loop, fully closed loop commercial systems. Today, I'm wearing my hat as the Director of Food Systems Integration at UKUAT, as Mark has previously mentioned. And I'm really happy to be joined by Anita, Tracy, and Toby, who will briefly talk about who they are and what they do in a moment after I've set the context of today's panel. So, just really thinking about things in terms of context, there's been a lot of discussion regarding commercial CEA these days, especially following on from some of the larger collapses that we've seen for big players internationally and domestically. And I'm thinking of Jones Food Group, for example, here in the UK. And it's kind of interesting in that a lot of people have started mentioning what's known as the Gartner hype cycle, which is this kind of graphic that describes the idea of implementation, acceptance, and progression of a new technology or system. And the consensus has kind of been that we've been through the trough of disillusionment, which is obviously the low point in the graph, and now we're starting on an upward trajectory, which is called the slope of enlightenment. I quite like that name, toward becoming something much more of a stable state for the industry and the technologies around it. What's of interest to me is that we're now seeing a big population shift in the farming community, and this is with regard to the generation of the farmer. So we're now into second generation controlled environmental protected farmers who are starting to consider their approaches and different avenues for success of their business operation or procedures. Also, at the same time, we're seeing the continued development of the social context, in particular with CEA and protected growing. This is gaining a lot of traction at the moment, as we'll hear more about during this panel. These moving beyond these massive venture-backed capital vertical farms that are producing premium lettuce for high-end grocery stores, and we're seeing smaller scales and wider participation, particularly with community growing in mind through projects like these that we'll hear about. I'd like to keep in mind impact as we go through this panel session. We'll discuss talking about scaling down technology or the alternative view, scaling up community engagement. And my favorite word, how to integrate these types of CEA in production to local food systems, schools, neighborhoods, or food insecure areas. I'd like to discuss some of the challenges and opportunities afforded by these interventions and how they might have been or might change the way people feel about protected growing systems. It's important to note that during the course of this panel, we are talking about quite a wide spectrum of interventions and systems. So controlled environment agriculture is already quite a broad topic in terms of definitions, and then putting the word community in there or urban makes it even more dilute. So we will be talking about a range of different interventions from, automated shipping containers next to public housing through to low-tech community greenhouses or rooftop hydroponic systems and everything in between. So before we get going, I'd like to go around the room and invite each speaker just to briefly introduce themselves and the project that they're working on. And I'll work through in the order that you are on my screen, if you don't mind. So Tracy, you're first up.
Hi, so I'm Tracy Epton and I'm a behavioural scientist from the University of Manchester. I lead the social science part of a project called Farm Urban Manchester, where we put edible walls, growing leafy greens into organisations and communities. And then we're currently talking to people about their sort of thoughts, their feelings and their behaviours around growing and eating produce from the edible walls and the impact it has on other aspects of their life too.
It's fantastic. Thank you very much. And thanks for joining us, Tracy. Toby, you're next.
Hi there, my name's Toby Evans, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Liverpool. But of most relevance to this conversation, I conducted my PhD research on low-tech, low-cost hydroponic systems for local growing of leafy greens at the University of Sheffield, which I completed in February. So yeah, we'll hopefully get into a lot of that today and sort of the implications from the findings from that.
Great. Thanks, Toby. Good to see you again. And Anita.
Hi, my name is Anita Yakkundi, and I run a social enterprise in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And our social enterprise is basically hydroponic, an inclusive center using hydroponic cultivation to provide opportunities for the neurodivergent community and marginalized community to engage into soilless cultivation.
Fantastic. And also thank you for joining us, Anita, and taking time today. So the way I kind of like to structure today is I've got a couple of themes and some questions, and we'll have this as an open table. So when we get to the question section, it's kind of a free-for-all, if you like. The first theme I'd like to think about is impact and redefining impact. And this is particularly thinking about the social versus commercial successes. So historically, CEA has been measured in yield per square meter or return on investment. Community CEA kind of flips the script on this and looks at social return on investment. When we inject technology into a community space, these metrics for success change, and it's especially no longer about profitability. It could be about accessibility, education, and health. So I'd like to ask straight off the bat, how do you balance financial sustainability with social impact? Can a community CEA project survive without relying entirely on grants or subsidies?
I'm going to jump in. Why not? So this was kind of the ethos for the project that me and you, Jake, ended up working on at Sheffield. So we were funded through the Transform UK Food Systems Strategic Priority Fund, and specifically the H3 project at Sheffield. And we developed low cost and low tech hydroponic systems to sort of implement hydroponics within a local sort of food system. And running this as on a semi-commercial basis, with some potential test cases being community growing or supplying into a local veg boxes. We were on a farm and at a dairy farm and at a National Trust site. So these were really good test cases for whether this kind of growing in these environments could work. And so we had 3 polytunnels, around 6 by 11 meters, so a total of like 200 meters square per site. We were using DIY gutters for these kind of systems, and so yeah, we wanted to try and find using these kind of systems. We could definitely see the test case for community growing. It's the kind of scale that would be possible, but is it possible to grow enough and enough scale? Could you have this as a business? And so the main learnings that we found off the back of this, purely looking at the lettuce side of things, we tested a whole load of different crops. So lettuce, pak choi, kales, herbs. We're still working through some of the data for some of the other things, but specifically looking at the lettuce, we found that a premium product was going to be totally necessary for more commercial viability within these kind of systems, and also that if you're purely going on wholesale sort of aspect, that wasn't really going to work either for the business models after we ran the economic models. So it kind of came down to, when we did economic modeling, a bit of a coin flip for these kind of enterprises. So if it was purely going to run on an economic basis, then it was going to be down to a bit of a coin flip. So in terms of can it survive without grants or subsidies? Like, yes, they can, but it's still a bit tentative on that basis from this specific system we were looking at. And I think that's kind of indicative of a lot of horticulture. kind of generally. It's still a bit of a coin flip in a lot of cases without extra support.
I find that interesting that you've focused on the commercial word there, Toby, and I think that shows a different perspective. It'd be quite interesting to hear what Anita and Tracy think success looks like for your projects in particular, because I can imagine bottom
Yeah.
line or profit might not necessarily be the end of it.
Yeah, we haven't been on our project, we've not been running these for profit at all. The produce, we've given communities these edible walls, which obviously are very expensive. They wouldn't be able to afford themselves, but we've put them into established community centres. And the hope is that, they can keep the wall after the project has ended. So some of the things, we want to be able to feed the local community with that. So one of the communities is attached to a food pantry, so the produce can go directly into there. The other is attached to a community kitchen as well, but also people can pick the vegetables that they want to take home. We're trying to make sure that they can sustain it on that small scale rather than do anything that's profitable. And the way we're going about this is we are training up people to, be able to maintain, to plant, to harvest the edible wall. So we've had a first batch of volunteers at, both of our community centres who've been trained up on this. And one of our earlier community centres, we're actually training the trainers. So we're training up the volunteers now to train the next generation of volunteers to hopefully sort of keep that kit going within that community. But we've also got, like, thinking of low-tech kind of solutions as well. We've also got some, small hydroponic kits that are just, like a lamp, a bulb, a plastic box with some kit in there for people to grow things. They can, they're really small. They can grow them on their kitchen counters. So we've got stuff like that for people to try growing their own. And even aquaponic units, they're a bit heavier and a bit bulkier, but, it's something that people can have there. So I think there's loads of options to do that, but yeah, very hard, I think, to actually make profit from. But I'm sure Anita's got things to say as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a very pertinent question. And our ideal situation would be to generate enough revenue to sustain ourselves. But that's not happening at the minute. We are relying quite heavily on grants. We do have revenues, but it's not enough to sustain the staffing level that we have. We will at AuSome GrowSome has not been running at a very big level. We are just been running at very maintaining it at a fairly low level in terms of the capacity as well for different reasons. But we've been going on and we do our focus. When I set up AuSome GrowSome, my main focus was to provide a platform and an opportunity for the neurodivergent and marginalized community and a space for people to learn. So that for me, success would be education and training and offering, I think, offering opportunity of a method of cultivation which may not be suitable for everybody. So for me, success is basically creating a space and a community and creating a social impact, creating mental health benefits for people who are not having opportunities in the mainstream. And we would like to engage with local businesses, which we are engaging. We have been engaging with local food businesses and supplying some of the produce. So for me, that aspect is also involving the food businesses in the social and the community element of things. And but at the minute, I don't think we are at scale, and we would need grants to really reach that stage where we are self-sufficient in the revenue.
Yeah, so, I think it's really interesting that Anita, sort of using those local businesses to try and bridge that gap. I found that within what we were doing and sort of finding that, bridging that gap is just super interesting sort of avenue. There's definitely, from the scale of these kind of operations that we're kind of using here, you don't get the matching of efficiency or cost sort of savings as in big industry, but there's those big impacts that can be had, or benefits, public benefits from these kind of systems in terms of community involvement, well-being. There are potentially environmental benefits as well. So it's definitely been really interesting for me, sort of looking at what are those bridges that can be implemented there to make these things then happen. Like how do you sell this and sort of get more buy-in to allow this to happen? And a few things that I kind of found through the PhD, sort of looking at more of my discussion sections, was there was some really good systems over in Spain in which they were funding water infrastructure projects through like large public sort of loan systems, so like 50-year loans. And it feels like there could be something very similar that could be done, because it's been seen as a public good, like and good for the industry too. And could something similar be done at this kind of scale, even at sort of local council scale, or even sort of national scale, in terms of public funding or blended finance, where the government sort of give like a backstop to some loans to help this kind of thing carry on, because there's these public benefits. Have you guys got any thoughts on how that could integrate with what you guys have been doing?
One of the things that we were sort of trying to do, because we put some edible walls in organisations as well, and we were hoping that, you know, what's going to happen after a few months of them having them in there for free, they're going to realise that there's lots of benefits in there, that, you know, they're attracting customers, they are, you know, a point of interest and, you know, good for their organisation, that they'll want to actually pay to keep those on and keep those maintained. Yeah. And then, you know, hopefully the business model would be where they, you know, what they're paying could actually help sustain one that's in a community centre. But we're just very early on in that as well. But thinking back to what Anita was saying about what she sees as success for her project is not about that profit.
Yeah,
it's, you know, it's things like, you know, with us, it's our impact on our communities. It's that, you know, trying to get people connected to like the food systems, getting people connected to the environment, and even getting people connected to each other through, you know, working with the wall. And we've got this ultimate aim where we do want to address dietary health inequalities, you know, by making sure that everybody has access to that sort of fresh vegetables, and that, you know, they do know how to prepare and eat them and integrate them into their diets. Yeah. So that's kind of, you know, the success we're looking for. But actually to have those, have that sort of profit to churn back into the system so we can do more would be really valuable as well.
Yeah,
there's some very interesting business models kind of floating around here, but it strikes me that the fundamental shortfall does come from government, really, and it's kind of reflected at the moment, very topical, but how food systems levers are being used to change where supplies are coming from, and attempt to support the cost of living crisis and things like that. And it does strike me that there's a gaping hole here of, wouldn't it be good if we were self-sustainable and if we kind of supported these sorts of operations where we're getting, you know, a couple of wins for the price of one. Just taking that a bit further, I think it'd be quite interesting to come back to the themes that I've been thinking about here, and one in particular, which this is skirting around, but it's the barriers to entry for these types of systems. You know, there's often a friction between different perspectives. People might look at controlled environment agriculture or protected growing as this kind of Silicon Valley style technology. And, you know, if you're a grassroots community organization, then it's kind of a long way away to kind of see yourself participating in growing using these systems. And so there needs to be a degree of trust building and demystifying the technologies. And I'm wondering, we've talked about profit in terms of keeping systems running, and you've touched on it slightly, Tracy, in terms of technical skills and training a trainer, which I think is a fantastic way forward. But I'm wondering how your organizations have dealt with these learning curves and how training with community members has gone. Anita, I don't know if you have something to say there.
So basically, in terms of we are promoting our social enterprise and the cultivation method as a complementary method of cultivation. And obviously, because when I set up AuSome GrowSome as a soilless method of cultivation, but the technology that we use is fairly low, and the technology is something that everybody can learn. So that's the kind of level of technology that we're using. And so for us, whenever we are engaging with other allotment holders, because we are actually where we are based is right bang in the middle of allotment site. So there are people who are using the conventional method of cultivation and projects going on in that area. So we promote it as a complementary method of cultivation, as an education element, and for people to see the method of cultivation, and also the unifying theme that runs, that plants grow, the scientific element. I think because I bring in the scientific element because of my background as being a scientist, so and an educator. So AuSome GrowSome, we focus on that aspect, and we haven't really met with a whole lot of resistance. Maybe because we have not reached that commercial scale yet, for people to feel threatened. But the few businesses that we've supplied and supply over the last few years have been happy and encouraged that kind of cultivation, So
Yeah.
yeah,
At the end of the day, plants are plants, right? There are different ways of growing, but they're still the same end product. I wonder, so you mentioned that you're in the middle of allotments. Have you encountered any skepticism from the more traditional gardeners
uh,
overall? And, have you had to deal with that face on?
well, there's been discussion with some traditional growers who are doing community projects using traditional methods of growing. But I mean, but clearly we have conversations, and there's space for everybody there. And so some people might prefer that method of cultivation, but it might not suit that method of the traditional cultivation, which was a precise reason why I set up AuSome GrowSome, because I'm a mom of an autistic person who doesn't want to work in soil. So, and there's more structure. I mean, so there's a lot of thought in setting up this method of cultivation. So for me, it is very clear to and engaging with the other growers who are using different methods, is that this is a method which exists for people who want to try this, who want to use this, and for whom it suits. And it is not competing with anybody. There's space for everybody. There are certain advantages and disadvantages to growing hydroponically, the technology that we use. So that is where maybe the other methods help, So yes, it's yeah.
We had some initial skepticism. So one of the first events we ran was with community gardeners. We invited a whole bunch of community gardeners over to see one of our first hydroponic walls. We'd put into an organisation. It was this innovation hub in central Manchester, and they were, I think, equal parts interested and skeptical, because we assured them that we're never trying to replace traditional gardening. This is something that's a supplement to it. But I found they were actually really quite interested in that, but they were more skeptical about how we could create community around the edible walls and this indoor sort of growing. than they have in their gardens, because actually a community garden, you're going, you're in the outdoors, you're doing jobs like and socializing with people. It's like a natural environment that increases your well-being, etc. And they thought that we wouldn't be able to meet lots of people's needs that they have met from a community garden. But what we found with people who want to be trained up in how to maintain and harvest the wall, etc., we're getting people coming to us with very different needs. Some people are interested in the tech. Some people are people who used to do outdoor gardening, and now, because they're a bit older or a bit less mobile, that they can't do that, or they haven't, they've no longer got those gardens that they were growing in. And, we get people who are some people just wanted to come because they wanted to learn English better, and get to know people in their communities. So actually, we're finding that it's not a problem to be, it might not do exactly what an outdoor community garden does, but it's still meeting a lot of those community needs there, which, I think is it's really valuable, because like Anita says, there's some people there who the outdoor gardening is not appropriate for.
Yeah, I think that's like really interesting to hear, and I think there's such a big opportunity here for this kind of level of community growing to really build that skills base, like for the industry as a whole, like as well as sort of having the local impact on the community. There's a real opportunity like here for industry to really back this kind of these kind of approaches to both benefit the communities, but you could be used as a real training ground, like a real sort of test bed for developing these skills, because there is a lack of training within the industry. We're going to need more people with these skills, and I think there's a real opportunity for industry and larger companies within CEA to kind of recognize this and to support it. And potentially put some money behind it too. Why not? Like Farm Urban kind of works on a with a 1% for the planet system, whereby some companies are funding them to help provide their lettuces to food banks. Why not keep that within the industry as a whole? Like potential investments could be made from larger CEA companies to help develop local projects, and there's a direct integration there. Like that support can move into working in from these small local communities, maybe into a larger glasshouse, maybe to a vertical farm. They might set up their own vertical farm. The possibilities are endless here, and I think that communication between the scales could be really, really interesting.
I think that's also a really nice idea to think about, that how we can both directly and indirectly create, those skills for people to just a capacity building people, so they can go on. If they might be developing direct skills related to growing CEAs, which is great, but there might also just be some transferable skills that they've got that they can then take to other areas of work as well. So I think it's really valuable.
I totally agree with that. And one of the projects that I've had the privilege of being involved in a number of years ago was looking at the establishment of hydroponic systems in a refugee camp in Jordan. And what was quite interesting there was the Syrian refugees have come from the Fertile Crescent, the most fertile part of the world. They're all very good growers, obviously growing in the ground. And we did a similar thing as you've been doing, Tracy, with trainer program. And there was a lot of skepticism first because people hadn't seen the technology. But once we kind of addressed that and crossed that barrier, which was through very simple means of here's a take-home DIY hydroponic system, have a play with it and see how you get on. Almost instantly, innovation became a thing, and you had people setting up these elaborate hydroponic systems made out of bits and pieces of components that you would never have considered as someone who's worked in this space for a long, long time. Bits that just. Yeah, they're just there, and they saw the principle, and because they're growers, they understood it, and they went off and started innovating. So there's that side of it as well. And I think there's an interesting potential there, and there's very blue skies thinking, but it would be very nice to kind of think about a fund for supporting those kind of
Yeah.
either skills
Yeah.
transitions, skills development, or innovations as well.
I think it's interesting there, Jake, that you talked about that sort of knowledge exchange in the true sense of it. It's not just us telling people about what we're doing, it's them showing us and telling us about what they can do. It's that mutual partnership, isn't it, of really learning from other people.
Yeah, I think it's essential, and especially if you work in the community context, because we may be expert at our different disciplines, but at the end of the day, how expert are you really? We've all got something to learn from other people, so it's important to learn through knowledge exchange and listening as well.
Yeah.
So I think we've already kind of touched on something I was thinking about earlier, which is the technology and how high tech or low tech do you normally operate? And it seems to me that the common theme here is that we're kind of working with low tech or basic food production systems. And would you think it's fair to say that's kind of driven by a couple of limitations, one being maybe the financial considerations, obviously the original cost and then maintenance of the system, and then or is it maybe more related to skills and acceptance from the people that you're working with?
For me, I think that there's a bit of both. Obviously, at AuSome GrowSome, what we set up, I'm constantly aware of and put myself in the place of different learners to see what technology I should put in place to have. But I'm also aware that there'll be some people who would really take to technology straight away. So there is, then it comes to the funds to put that technology and maintain and drive that technology, because there will be some people who will be fantastic in working at that technology end of things, whereas there'll be other people with different other abilities can do something which doesn't necessarily need that level of technology. So there's a bit of a both. But I do think that what we work on is to have technology which is suitable, and we're constantly innovating with things that we can recycle, reuse within our local milieu and local community there. And we are very environmentally conscious of trying to do that as well. So all of that impact on the level of technology that we are using.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's that balance, isn't it? At the end of the day, like most things, there is a degree of money required to keep the face washed, as it were.
Yeah.
I wondered if you want to talk a little bit about your experience, Toby, because obviously I know the hydroponic systems that you were working on with your PhD, but there was kind of a theme to those in terms of technology, wasn't there?
Yes, well, the ethos of the project was to try and keep them as low tech as possible to kind of reduce the barriers there as much as we could, and to address both of those avenues. And as we were kind of the only ones really using it, it's difficult to know on a sort of a usability sort of test sort of basis how well we address those issues. I sort of came into the PhD as a fairly inexperienced grower, and so I think by the fact that I could use them and we got some good yields, it feels like it came from really a start to finish kind of product or kind of a project, I guess, anyway. And I'd say I'm an okay grower now, so I think it probably works as a kind of system to train people up. So yeah, I think it's definitely things to take into account, and ours definitely sort of straddled that avenue between commercial and sort of low tech, or using low tech to become sort of semi-commercial to bridge that. And I think there's some really good examples around of companies using different business models, like community supported agriculture, sort of whereby you've got like sort of subscription models, veg box-esque type approaches. There's like an indoor farm actually over in the US, Area 2 farms in Virginia, I think, and they're sort of very small. Well, not very small actually. They started off quite small, but they've expanded quite a lot recently, and they're vertical and indoors. But they're using this community-supported agriculture approach. So it's interesting to see that yeah, it's not just the low-tech stuff that uses these alternative business models and alternative approaches, that it can be applicable to indoor as well. But I think the viability of those is then, or the sustainability and whether it can just keep going on its own accord, is always going to be down to the same limitations of all CEA in terms of access to renewable energy or sort of low cost energy, and sort of suitability of the site. Like the tech levels usually are dictated by what you've got access to. So if you have access to outdoor space and sunlight, definitely try and use it. It's cheaper often, and as long as the outdoor climate also sort of plays into that. So those limitations are always going to be there.
I do think there's a lot, what you were saying there is due to like resources, the cost, Toby, because I don't think we can assume that people aren't necessarily experts. We'll have, you know, people who are electricians there, people who've been, you know, growing things for many years, people who have, you know, dealt with other kinds of like machinery and electricals in the communities. So I do think a lot of it just comes down to what's available to them.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, definitely.
I think this is so I'm often finding myself kind of defending CEA because a lot of people will say, oh, you know, you're never going to fix the world's food safety and food security issues with controlled environment agriculture, and I vehemently agree with that. I don't think it's a silver bullet. But I do think one of the greatest strengths about it, and a differentiating factor from conventional or soil-based growing, is that skill set that's behind these technologies, and the fact that you can apply so many different things to it. It interests me that there hasn't really been a strong uptake of protected or controlled environment training through colleges, because I could see an opportunity here of everything from very, very sort of standard skills like plumbing and electronics and work in that space, through to very, very specific skill sets like programming languages and sensor construction, things like that. I think that's one of the greatest strengths of the industry, and I think one of its weaknesses that's coupled with that is that we aren't engaging with the community enough, because I think, you know, at an industrial level or commercial level, it's a lot more focused on that bottom line and less about the social element. So just moving on from that, I wondered if you'd kind of suggested a theme of integration into the broader food system, and we've kind of briefly touched on where you guys sit with your projects on this, but I think it's important to think about that context as well. It's good that you can work in small scale, but you kind of, especially in Sheffield, when we think about some of the work we've done, Toby, and some of the work I've done with a community interest company here called Foodworks, you know, they have quite an interesting role in our local food system in Sheffield, and it makes me think about, you know, what kind of knock-on effects there might be for other infrastructure, like, for example, schools or food banks or local restaurants. So I think that does make me wonder about policy and planning, and maybe at a regional level, maybe at a national level, or maybe even at just, you know, with the agencies that you partner with. Have you had any kind of regulatory hurdles which prevent you from doing any of your work within community CEA, or any regulatory hurdles which might prevent you from scaling? Anita, I'm kind of looking at you.
I was hoping Anita might be able to jump us off there. If not, I can definitely talk to.
Maybe I'll let.
Oh, sorry, there we go, Anita.
Sorry, I was trying to get my internet on, so I
Yeah,
don't think I heard the full question there. But
Sure.
maybe Toby, if you get on, and then I'll maybe get to the grips of it, while you're talking here.
Sure, sure. So basically, I was asking, with regard to your work and your projects work that you do, and maybe looking at a wider food system. Have you had any and integration with that? Have you had any issues with planning or regulatory hurdles that you've had to tackle, or that you might have to tackle if you were to scale up?
Uh, Actually, yeah, at the minute we've not really had that hurdles because we are operating at such a small scale.
Mhm.
I would think we would encounter some of those regulatory hurdles once we scale up, uh, which I don't know yet, but I
Mhm.
suspect we might encounter those. Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
had
Oh, sorry.
yeah, we've not scaled up yet and not really come across this, but where we've spoken to like people from local authorities and like food partnerships and food boards, they've actually been really interested
Mhm.
in what we're doing and seeing that, as one route to getting sort of better dietary equalities. So actually, we've, just at these early stages, we've had a lot of interest and support from that. I'm sure the regulatory problems will come up later.
Mhm.
I think that CEA, sort of, especially like urban CEA, can definitely be a way to get around some of the hurdles that end up coming around for urban agriculture when you are trying to grow outdoors. In a lot of cases, being involved with the development of the Chef Food plan, the local food strategy for Sheffield, was really, really interesting. We had a lot of sessions kind of working on what are the barriers, what are the issues, and a lot of those kind of stemmed from access to land in terms of community people who wanting to do local growing but not knowing where they could access land, having adequate land, it being safe, so areas that were okay to grow in, or needing to build sort of raised beds, things like this. Whereas often, in some cases, bringing it indoors and using CEA can be a remedy to that, and sort of removing those sort of those restrictions and allowing you to do it anywhere. And so you can still get people involved with growing, even if you don't have a specific space that's good for it outdoors. Which is exactly what the Farm Urban Manchester project and the edibles that Farm Urban are developing talk to quite a lot as well. That you can be dropped in anywhere and be run. So I think it's got real good to kind of address barriers in some aspects. In terms of scaling up, I imagine that yeah, sort of the infrastructure sort of it gets kind of lost down the cracks sometimes in terms of falling between being industrial and agricultural in a lot of cases. I'm more thinking in terms of larger glass houses here, but I imagine the same thing would be true in urban settings in terms of building regulations, that kind of thing. Once you try to scale up, making sure that it fits those regulations would definitely be big considerations, and probably more time hassle as well, especially if it's community led. That time is really valuable, and just all the paperwork that goes alongside things can make it unfeasible purely from that point of view.
Yeah, and sometimes these hurdles might come from rather than coming from government or any kind of governance, they might come from people that you partner with or might want to partner with. I'm wondering if either of you on the panel have actually worked with any larger institutions who bought into your projects, and particularly thinking about as a supplier supplying your product to them. And these might be people like anchor institutions like the NHS or local authority catering services or even educational providers. So, have you had any experience with any of that at all, Anita?
So we were working at one of the university catering teaching stream at that time, and they were running a little restaurant, but very small scale again. So we were linking with them to provide some of our supplies, because predominantly what we do is microgreens, so they're again a niche product, so we were supplying them for many years, but now they've started their own. So we've lost that growth there. But apart from that, I think with the university, we've only linked up more for the education purpose rather than the produce.
Was that a restaurant at the university, Anita?
Yes.
That's really cool. Well, in a way, they've started their own, and it's a shame for you in the fact that they're now cut you out.
Yes, but I think we didn't grow at the rate that we should have grown for different constraints. So, but anyway, I think, but it was good to link up with them, and because it was a catering teaching this thing course at the university, so I think we would have maybe raised awareness, which is not a bad thing,
We've had one put into a restaurant at the Lowry at Salford, which is a restaurant and a theatre. Really managed to get it into loads of other settings as, to try and develop it as a business model just yet. I know Farm Urban, the social enterprise based in Liverpool, who are our partner in this, we've been trying to put in grants to get them into some like GP surgeries, into hospitals, so healthcare settings like that. But I think, we've just got to build those opportunities, because where they have been put in there, we've actually seen positive impacts of how people sort of react to the produce in the wall.
That's really great to hear.
I think similarly to Anita, we did had at the University of Sheffield, we had conversations with the catering sort of procurement sort of area to sort of end up supplying into the university sort of through us growing at our two different sites. Sadly, it didn't really get far enough, sort of both within the project and those discussions to sort of get there. But even just sort of entering into those discussions was pretty interesting. I know you kind of had more sort of lead on that, Jake, but you might want to even just sort of discuss that actually, rather than me sort of spouting what you did.
Yeah. It's I would say it obviously depends on your model, right? And if you're, we approached the work with an H3 from a commercial perspective. The idea being, how low can you go and still wash your own face? And so, we were running systems without any particular controls in terms of environment. We weren't doing any processing on the product itself or anything like that. And the question was to our catering procurement team, would you stock it? And the original answer was no. Just flat out no. We rely on large scale procurement agreements, which are done in partnership with a number of other universities, and there will be no way that you can compete with them. And so then the question was raised, well, when we think about sustainability in your procurement policies, should you not be stocking things that are grown very locally? And of course, that then changed the framing, and it was, okay, actually, we need to think about this. But then one of the most interesting barriers that hadn't really crossed my mind before we started this project came up, which is food safety standards. And particularly when you start thinking about processing your crops, if you're growing whole head lettuce and just cutting that off and sending that out, that's an unprocessed crop. Food safety standards don't really care. But as soon as you start stripping leaves off anything, which you do with microgreens, or you might process a loose leaf, a loose head lettuce into a bagged salad. As soon as you make that cut, it's processing, and all of a sudden you trigger a whole other set of standards that you need to meet through the FSA regulations. And because of the way that universities' procurement worked, it was kind of structured in parallel to some of the big suppliers, like for example Tesco's, Sainsbury's, and so they were running on accreditations through the SALSA scheme. Now, if you know anything about food safety standards, there's food safety standards which are here, and they're quite high when you look at it compared to the global norm for food safety standards. We're very good at looking after our food in the UK, but then when you bring in independent accreditations like SALSA, we're up here all of a sudden. You can understand that because it's a risk management and mitigation strategy for large suppliers, but it is also a huge, barrier for anyone kind of wanting to get into this space. But I mean, this is a completely different context to the CEA for community or urban space. But one thing that has crossed my mind during this discussion is when you start thinking about sustainability and procurement agreements in particular, it would be interesting to see social sustainability captured in there as well. So not just
Yeah.
thinking about environmental sustainability, but also, okay, if there's an operation, they might not meet the yields that we require, but shouldn't there be some kind of social incentive for us to support those operations? And I think that's something that
Yeah.
would be really nice to see kind of explored in the future. Again, I'm very blue skies and optimistic
Yeah,
with
but
these sorts of
I
things.
think it's totally necessary, isn't it?
Mm.
If we're going to if this kind of area is going to be supported, that frame shift, I think even to be sort of wider, looking at just circular economy sort of thinking, not just at CEA but just generally, that acknowledgement that investing in local areas and keeping that money within that sort of local areas is really beneficial, and you're supporting local areas, and it can be direct too. So at the university, you have that direct connection. There's potential for interest if you're doing stuff like you were saying, Tracy, to putting them in at GPs or within like hospitals. There's land that is definitely owned by the government and by the NHS and things that could support a polytunnel or an urban or having like a wall or something like this, to bring people in and involve them in as well as that procurement process directly being there, having that sort of local involvement there, and that frame shift's totally necessary to be able to get in the door there, because it's all just bottom line profit at the moment, and so getting the value on what extra value is actually being provided by these sort of small scale growing operations, it's totally necessary.
Right. Well, I think we're more or less bang on time, and that seems like a natural conclusion to our discussion. So I just really want to take this opportunity to thank you all for participating in this talk. I know it's been a bit of a challenging day in terms of technical connections and whatnot, but for making the time today, it's been fantastic. And I think we should all stay in touch and talk about ways that we can help facilitate each other's projects, because these are interventions that I don't think receive enough credit and certainly don't receive enough support, and sometimes can end up being kind of separated off. And it would be nice to have a united front on things going forward, especially when we start to think about talking with local authorities or government. So I guess at that point, unless there's anything else that anyone else wanted to add, I will hand over to Mark. No, seems like it's up to
I'd
you
just
now,
like
Mark.
to say thank you to Anita. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Cool, and I'd love to remain in contact, actually.
Definitely.
Great. And I guess maybe we should say, Mark, for anyone watching this retrospectively, I think perhaps we could open up questions in some way. I'm happy to share my email through the UKUAT, which would maybe, if the other speakers, would you be happy to share your email addresses as well?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
100%. Yeah.
Perhaps we share them in alignment with the video, and then if there are any questions come up, we can try and answer them.
And also thanks to UKUAT, we've always had your support, Mark, as well as UKUAT. So really appreciate you of that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Anita. That's very kind of you to say. We're delighted to be able to put together things like this, where people come and, sort of collaborate with one another. I absolutely love this idea that, you're all going to stay in touch and are willing to talk to other people. That's absolutely the name of the game, as far as I'm concerned, is why I started this thing in the first place, way back in the mists of time. So, yeah, very happy with that. Um, Totally agree with everything Jake said, essentially, about how we can all be supporting each other to do better and to get more recognition for these smaller projects that get lost in that hype cycle, but are out there doing good, whether they're high tech or low tech. I mean, every time I seem to look, there's another two or three of these now that are sort of springing up somewhere where people are just trying to do good in their own communities, and they're not necessarily looking to be global superstars or going around, sort of giving conferences to investors or whatever. They just want to do some good in their community and make good things happen. And I think that's really the spirit of what this sort of thing ought to be about a lot of the time. So yeah, it just remains for me to say, unless Jake, you were about to jump in there because I see you unmuting.
No,
No? Okay, cool. Well, then it just remains for me to say, yeah, thank you to all of you. Thank you to everyone who has patiently put up with our slight technical jiggery pokery this morning. There will be another day of the CEA and indoor farming event, which I believe is currently scheduled for the 26th of June, I should say. In the meantime, those of you who are watching this, if you're registered for that event, you should still have access to the platform, to previous speakers, to recordings, all of that kind of stuff will be there. And you can also still network with the other people that are still milling around in the platform. So do go and visit that. Hopefully, we'll be able to see all of you again at that event. Um, and yeah, we'll continue the conversation and many other conversations. But thank you again to all of you for a fascinating discussion. And yeah, we'll wrap it up there.
Right. Thanks very
Thanks,
much, everyone.
guys.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Speak to you all soon. Bye.